as a meeting of the parties to the Paris Agreement. Today, heads of state and governments will deliver national statements in parallel plenaries, Ken Grom and Penny Fan. Before we begin, I would like to remind distinguished heads of state and government of actions in place to ensure effective time management. There is a 3-minute time limit for statements during the high-level segment. Statements should be as concise as possible, noting that full text of the official statements will be made available on the UNFCCC website. And finally, please note that heads of state or government who are not in the plenary at the time for delivery of their statements will be rescheduled to speak at the end of all statements of the same category. As part of the hygiene measures to ensure a safe environment of all participants, statements will be delivered from alternate rostrums. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, I'm delighted that so many of you have joined us here in Glasgow to make your vital national statements. I invite you all to take this opportunity to demonstrate how your country has strengthened its commitments under the Paris Agreement. To tell us what steps you are taking to deliver these targets and plans, and crucially, how together we can do more. On this stage today, you have the chance to send a clear signal to your negotiators and the world about what must be achieved at COP26 and why we must work together to accelerate climate action in this decisive decade. As you all know, the science is clear that the window of time that we have to keep the Paris temperature goal in reach and to avoid the worst effects of climate change is closing fast. But with political will and commitment, we can and must deliver an outcome in Glasgow the world can be proud of. I'm also pleased that after the national statements today and in breaks in the programme tomorrow, we will hear from a selection of leading voices across civil society, business and finance to celebrate and showcase action and ambition across all 3 pillars of the Paris Agreement. At this time, I will now close the video link connecting the plenaries, and we will proceed with the delivery of national statements in both plenaries. At the end of the delivery of national statements in each plenary, the meeting will be adjourned. The world will be listening intently to your statements. It is now my great pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Pedro Sanchez Perez, President of the Government of Spain. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
President, heads of government, prime ministers, delegates. Since we met in Madrid 2 years ago now, there is even more certainty around the risks of the climate emergency. Just like we were recalled by the United Nations Secretary General, scientists talk about the code red situation that we find ourselves in, and it's obvious that we need a new international order that recognises the role of all stakeholders, governments, public administration, citizens, companies in the financial sector as key agents for change. May it acknowledge that this decade is clear, and may it align the short-term ambition with a long-term vision. The good news is that we know what needs to be done, but we need political determination and immediate action. The first objective must be to reduce emissions and increase our level of ambition so that the 1.5 degree centigrade objectives remains an objective that is within our reach. We must opt for renewable energy efficiency, clean transport, the conservation and restoration of our ecosystems and urban rehabilitation. We must abandon fossil fuels, and it's essential to protect biodiversity and preserve our oceans and Antarctica. Thus, my country, Spain, has reduced its coal electricity generation by 90% over the last 4 years. In addition, we did this with dialogue and social cohesion because the ecological transition must be fair. Our societies must perceive the green transition not as a threat, but rather as a great opportunity for inclusive economic growth. In this regard, in our country, in Spain, we are making decisive steps forward to align our both public and private investments with the objective of carbon neutrality, and we have provided and adopted a new climate change and energy transition law that establishes this and have allocated more than 30 billion euros to the economic recovery plan for the green transition. And we also need to create adequate frameworks for adaptation policies. Our country, Spain, is particularly vulnerable to extreme phenomena. On a domestic level, we have a second national plan for 2013, and we have sent the adaptation communication of Spain to the United Nations. We're also going to bolster our external action in this regard, and Spain is going to allocate 30 million euros to the United Nations Adaptation Plan in 2022. Thirdly, if we increase our level of ambition, we must back goals with resources. Therefore, the $100 billion objective will be some proof of the firepower of the COP26 when it comes to re-establishing trust between northern and southern countries. And Spain will do its bit. And we commit to increasing climate funding to reach, by 2025, an increase of 50% compared to our current commitments. And our objective is to reach 1.35 billion euros per year by 2025. Further, Spain will allocate 20% of its new special drawing rights to vulnerable countries, a minimum of 350 million euros. And by way of conclusion, I would like to launch an appeal, and that is for us to work together to ensure that this COP is a turning point that brings about a real change of course for our planet through urgent action with solidarity and robust action. This will close the gaps of inequality and enable everyone to perceive the benefits of climate action and the green transition. Thank you very much, President.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It's now my great pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Mohamed Ghazouani, President of Mauritania. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
أصحاب الفخامة والمعالي السادة والسيدات رؤساء الدول والحكومات.
Excellencies, heads of state and of government, Mr. President of the 26th Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, Mr. Secretary General of the United Nations, distinguished representatives of intergovernmental and non-governmental organizations, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Climate change, due to its multifarious disastrous impacts, is today a first-order challenge that humanity as a whole must live up to as a matter of urgency. This 26th Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change provides us with the opportunity of welcoming the international impetus towards climate action and to reassert the need to place the environmental transition at the top of the strategic priorities for the 2030 Agenda and of all the public policies for post-COVID recovery. It is indeed incumbent upon our states to individually and collectively implement all the measures required by the building of pathways for development which is more environmentally friendly, lower carbon, more resilient, and more inclusive. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Mauritania has just revised its nationally determined contribution to the climate, and even though our greenhouse gas emissions are extremely marginal, we have planned to reduce them by 11% as compared to 2018 by 2030. With an outside financial support that were more robust, we would be able to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. The efforts that we have made over the period 2015 to 2021 have enabled us to bring the share of renewable energy in the energy mix from 18% in 2015 to 34% in 2020, and we expect to achieve a level of 50% by 2030. These results will be supported by a new development program for green hydrogen. Thanks to this new sector, Mauritania is providing the world with an alternative and sustainable source of clean energy. We would invite financial institutions and businesses who are interested to support us in this project. Moreover, our national climate contribution also supports the environmental transition in other sectors which have a significant mitigation potential, such as transport, agriculture, animal husbandry, and forestry. However, adaptation to climate change and the strengthening of the resilience of vulnerable populations remain our priority. Within this framework, clear progress has already been achieved in terms of restoring land ecosystems, particularly through the implementation of the Great Green Wall program. In January, during the One Planet Summit, major funding pledges were made to support the Great Green Wall. The implementation of these promises is something that is today expected by millions of Africans who are suffering from the deterioration of their livelihoods. Therefore, we would invite COP26 to make the Great Green Wall program an international priority. And we would ask more comprehensively that financing for adaptation and the environmental transition be significantly increased and transferred in the majority of these pledges as donations in order not to exacerbate the debt burden of developing countries. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we are convinced that climate action is a social, environmental, economic, and security priority, and as such, Mauritania remains fully committed to foster international climate cooperation and accelerate the environmental transition which we need today more than ever. Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, we are convinced that climate action is a social, environmental, economic, and security priority, and therefore the Islamic Republic of Mauritania will remain fully committed to ensure that international climate cooperation progresses and to advance the environmental transition which we need now more than ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is now my great pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Joseph R. Biden, Jr., President of the United States of America. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, to state the obvious, we meet with the eyes of history upon us and the profound questions before us. It's simple. Will we act? Will we do what is necessary? Will we seize the enormous opportunity before us? Or will we condemn future generations to suffer? This is the decade that will determine the answer, this decade. The science is clear. We only have a brief window left before us to raise our ambitions and to raise to meet the task that's rapidly narrowing. This is a decisive decade in which we have an opportunity to prove ourselves. We can keep the goal of limiting global warming to just 1.5 degrees Celsius within our reach if we come together. If we commit to doing our part of each of our nations with determination and with ambition. That's what COP26 is all about. Glasgow must be the kickoff of a decade of ambition and innovation to preserve our shared future. Climate change is already ravaging the world. We've heard from many speakers. It's not hypothetical. It's not a hypothetical threat. It's destroying people's lives and livelihoods, and doing it every single day. It's costing our nations trillions of dollars. Record heat and drought, fueling more widespread and more intense wildfires in some places and crop failures in others. Record flooding and what used to be a once-in-a-century storms are now happening every few years. In the past few months, the United States has experienced all of this, and every region of the world can tell similar stories. And in an age where this pandemic is made so painfully clear that no nation can wall itself off from borderless threats, we know that none of us can escape the worst that's yet to come if we fail to seize this moment. But ladies and gentlemen, within the growing catastrophe, I believe there's an incredible opportunity, not just for the United States, but for all of us. We're standing at an inflection point in world history. We have the ability to invest in ourselves and build an equitable, clean energy future, and in the process, create millions of good-paying jobs and opportunities around the world. Cleaner air for our children, more bountiful oceans, healthier forests and ecosystems for our planet. We can create an environment that raises the standard of living around the world. And this is a moral imperative, but it's also an economic imperative. If we fuel greater growth, new jobs, better opportunities for all our people, and as we see current volatility in energy prices, rather than cast it as a reason to back off our clean energy goals, we must view it as a call to action. High energy prices only reinforce the urgent need to diversify sources, double down on clean energy development, and adapt promising new clean energy technologies so we can not only we don't remain overly reliant on one source of power to power our economies and our communities. It's in the self-interest of every single nation. And this is a chance, in my view, to make a generational investment in our economic resilience and in our workers and our communities throughout the world. That's what we're going to do in the United States. My Build Back Better framework will make historic investments in clean energy, the most significant investment to deal with the climate crisis that any advanced nation has made ever. We're going to cut U.S. greenhouse gas emissions by well over a gigaton by 2030, while making it more affordable for consumers to save on their own energy bills, with tax credits for things like installing solar panels, weatherizing their homes. Lowering energy prices will also deliver cleaner air and water for our children, electrifying fleets of school buses, increasing credits for electric vehicles, and addressing legacy pollution. It will incentivize clean energy manufacturing, building the solar panels and the wind turbines that are growing energy markets of the future, which will create good-paying union jobs for American workers, and something that none of us should lose sight of. When I talk to the American people about climate change, I tell them it's about jobs. It's about workers who will lay thousands of miles of transmission lines of clean, modern, resilient power grid. The auto workers who build the next generation of electric vehicles, and electricians who will install a nationwide network of 500,000 vehicle stations to power them throughout my country. The engineers who will design new carbon capture systems, and the construction workers who will make them a reality. The farmers who will not only help fight global hunger, but also use the soil to fight climate change. The communities that revitalize themselves around new industries and opportunities. And because we are taking all these actions, the United States will be able to meet the ambitious target I set in the Leaders Summit in Climate back in April, reducing U.S. emissions by 50 to 52% below 2005 levels by 2030. We'll demonstrate to the world the United States is not only back at the table, but hopefully leading by the power of our example. I know it hasn't been the case, and that's why my administration is working overtime to show that our climate commitment is action, not words. On my very first day in office, I took action to return the United States to the Paris Agreement. Since then, our administration has been hard at work unlocking clean energy breakthroughs to drive down the cost of technologies that will require us to achieve net zero emissions, and working with the private sector on the next generation of technologies that will power a clean economy of the future. Over the next several days, the United States will be announcing new initiatives to demonstrate our commitment to providing innovative solutions across multiple sectors, from agriculture to oil and gas, to combating deforestation, to tackling hard and to abate industries. We're planning for both short-term sprint to 2030 that will keep 1.5 degrees Celsius in reach, and for a marathon that will take us to the finish line and transform the largest economy in the world into a thriving, innovative, equitable, and just clean energy engine of net zero for a net zero world. That's why today I'm releasing the U.S. long-term strategy, which presents a vision of achieving the United States goal of net zero emissions economy-wide by no later than 2050, and reinforces an absolutely critical nature of taking bold action in the decisive decade. We're also going to try to do our part when it comes to helping the rest of the world take action as well. We want to do more to help countries around the world, especially developing countries, accelerate their clean energy transition, address pollution, and ensure the world we all must share a cleaner, safer, healthier planet. We have an obligation to help. At the United Nations in September, I announced that my administration is working with the Congress to quadruple our climate finance support for developing countries by 2024, including significant increases in support for adaptation efforts. This commitment is made possible to each of our collective goals of mobilizing $100 billion annually for climate finance, but mobilizing finance at the scale necessary to meet the incredible need is an all-hands-on-deck effort. As other speakers today have mentioned, governments in the private sector and multilateral development banks must also do their work to go from millions to billions to trillions, the necessary effect of this transition. Today, I'm also submitting a new adaptation communication laying out how we will implement the global goal of adaptation, as well as announcing our first ever contribution to the Adaptation Fund. But our commitment is about more than just financing. That's a critical piece of it. But we're also going to support solutions across the board. In the lead up to this gathering, the United States joined our G7 partners to launch a Build Back Better World initiative. We also reconvened the Major Economies Forum on Energy and Climate to launch transformative actions and to raise ambition. And together with the European Union, we're launching a global methane pledge to collectively reduce methane emissions, one of the most potent greenhouse gases, by at least 30% by the end of the decade. More than 70 countries have already signed up to support rapid reduction of methane pollution, and I encourage every nation to sign on. It's the simple, most effective strategy we have to slow global warming in the near term. My friends, if we're to recognize that a better, more hopeful future of every nation has to do its part with ambitious targets to keep 1.5 degrees in reach and specific plans of how to get there, especially the major economies. It's imperative that we support developing nations so they can be our partners in this effort. Right now, we're still falling short There's no more time to hang back or sit on the fence or argue amongst ourselves. This is the challenge of our collective lifetimes, the existential threat to human existence as we know it. And every day we delay, the cost of inaction increases. So let this be the moment that we answer history's call here in Glasgow. Let this be the start of a decade of transformative action that preserves our planet and raises the quality of life for people everywhere. We can do this. We just have to make a choice to do it. So let's get to work, and thank you. Those of us who are responsible for much of the deforestation and all the problems we have so far have an overwhelming obligation to the nations who, in fact, were not there, have not done it. And we have to help much more than we have thus far. God bless you all, and may God save the planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I'll now request COP Rapporteur Ahmed Rajabi to continue chairing the session.
It is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Joko Widodo, President of Indonesia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Your Excellency, climate change is a major threat to global prosperity and development. Solidarity, partnership, cooperation, global collaboration are key. With its abundant natural resources, Indonesia continues to contribute in tackling climate change. Deforestation rates have fallen significantly, the lowest in 20 years. Rate of forest fires were down by 82% in 2020. Indonesia has begun the rehabilitation of mangrove forests covering an area of 600,000 hectares by 2024, the largest in the world. Indonesia has also rehabilitated 3 million critical lands between 2010 to 2019. The sector, which contributed 60% of Indonesia's emissions, will reach carbon net sink by 2030. In the energy sector, we continue to move forward with the development of electric vehicle ecosystem, development of Southeast Asia's largest solar power plant, utilization of new and renewable energy, including biofuels, as well as development of clean energy industries, including the world's largest green industrial park in North Kalimantan. However, this is not sufficient. We, particularly countries with large green areas and re-greening potentials, as well as countries with vast seas that have the potential to contribute to carbon sequestration, we need support and contribution from developed countries. Indonesia will continue to mobilize climate finance and innovative financing, such as blended finance, green bonds, and green sukuk or Sharia bonds. Fulfillment of climate finance by developed country partners is a game changer in climate change mitigation and adaptation for developing countries. Indonesia will be able to contribute faster to the world's net zero emissions goal. The question is, how big are developed countries' contributions for us? What kind of transfers of technology can be provided? This creates action and implementation as quickly as possible. In addition, carbon market and carbon pricing must be part of the efforts to address climate change issues. A carbon economy ecosystem that is transparent and has integrity, inclusive, and fair must be created. Excellencies, in closing, at this summit, on behalf of the Archipelagic and Small Island States Forum, or the AIS, Indonesia is honored to circulate a joint statement of the leaders of the Archipelagic and Island States Forum, and the AIS Forum will continue its commitment to promote maritime cooperation and climate action in the UNFCCC. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Wawel John Charles Ram Kolovan, President of Seychelles. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you, fellow leaders of our nations, thus of our planet, neither as a scientist nor as an environmental expert, but as a citizen of our beautiful planet, and more specifically as an island boy facing reality. What I experience in my beautiful islands that most visitors describe as paradise is the destruction of our environment and livelihood. This, I am sure, is what we all see in the various parts of the world we come from, be it flooding, forest fires, extreme temperatures, delayed rainy seasons, coastal erosion, destruction of wildlife, fewer and smaller fish, and many more. These, unfortunately, are all part of the destruction process of planet Earth and the self-imposed eventual extinction of the planet's most intelligent species, the human being. Some of the questions that our young people are asking us, and which should touch our conscience as guardians of this oxygen-blessed planet, are: leaders, when are you going to shift from words to action? When are you going to stop making empty promises? When are you going to start taking us and our future seriously? When are you going to show that you actually care? These are damning questions that will confirm our legacy. Forget about mammoth achievements. For 1 second, we must all look at the mandate bestowed on us and allow our decisions to surpass political considerations and repose on only one agenda: the survival of our planet. Our people want a better life, and this starts by being alive. Seychelles is a victim. So are other small island developing states. We suffer the effects and consequences of industrialization and climate change. We are already gasping for survival. When I hear the expression "rise in sea level," I am scared, because it brings home the awareness that my country's granitic islands will lose all the economic activities happening around the coast. And I also realize that the beautiful archipelago of 115 islands that we are today may be reduced to less than 50 as our coral islands disappear, including the Aldabra Atoll, our gift to humanity. Fellow leaders, from the Seychelles, our message is simple. We have to act immediately. The environment partnership to save our planet must happen here in Glasgow 2021. Let COP26 be the determining point. Let the change be a real one. Let the paradigm shift happen. May the industrialized nations understand that they cannot continue polluting without reserve. May those who exploit without thinking of tomorrow stop. May the corrupt poachers of our planet change their ways. And may we realize that in this battle to save our planet, we are not in the proverbial same boat, but that we are indeed in the same boat, big, small, rich or poor. The disaster experienced by COVID-19 will be seen as but a breeze. For COVID, the world came together and developed the vaccine. For the protection of our planet, the only vaccine is our sincere commitment and concrete actions. In other words, we have to be honest and action-oriented. I plead with the rich nations to look at the less fortunate ones as equal partners. Can we agree, for example, to put an end to the expression high income earning in order to accept a vulnerability index whereby we will not be measured according to the sacrifice, the hard work, planning, and devotion to serve our people, but rather on how vulnerable we actually are. Seychelles is considered high income, but overnight it lost 75% of its tourism industry due to COVID-19, and the world stopped for my people. This is vulnerability. Can we, the ones who are less responsible for the planet's destruction, but who on the contrary are doing our utmost, like preserving our limited landmass or EEZ, be held generously when we are protecting our coastlines, preserving our disappearing islands, managing seagrass meadows larger than Switzerland, or fighting IUU fishing activities? Our message is, we cannot do it with our limited resources. We need your contribution. We have one mission today, Mr. President, and that is to save our planet. In order to accomplish the task, we have to come together and act immediately. The partnership is for yesterday. Tomorrow is not an option, for it will be too late. The African proverb resonates loudly in my head. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. But today, at COP26, my ancestors from Africa are asking me to tweak this proverb. If you want to destroy the planet quickly, go alone. If you want to save the planet, let us do it together. Our youth and future generations are pleading and counting on us. Our children, babies, and Mother Nature herself are telling us loudly and clearly, no hypocrisy, no make-believe, no empty promises, no hot air. Rather, they want our commitment, steadfastness, and resolve. So from Seychelles, we are doing our best. We are committed, however small we are. Let us not disappoint our youth and the world, but rather, as one human race, let us save our habitat, and by doing so, let us save our planet and ensure the survival of our beautiful Mother Earth. The time to act is yesterday. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Emmanuel Macron, President of France. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, heads of government heads of state, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, many things have been said, and we have, at the opening, have said extremely strong things, and there was a lot of emotion, I believe, because we want to say how urgent things are, and we are aware of what we're experiencing. And if we're expected to act collectively today, well, if we met today collectively, is to say what we said 6 years ago. We need to. At the beginning, there was not agreement. There are three values: ambition, solidarity, and trust. That is pursuant to the Paris Agreement. During the last 6 years, since Paris, some have forgotten these values. Some have wanted to drop out or doubt, but we've held fast. When we look at the last few years that have just gone by, we have been able to keep all of the international community united so that we can continue to fight and face the problem. Now, our challenge as to whether to see if this COP is a success or not is mid-term results. Our aim is 1.5 degrees by the end of this century. It was reaffirmed yesterday in the G20 in Rome. We know that today we're not there yet because the September report, UN report, says that the current trend would leave us to 2.7 degrees. The efforts made in the run-up to COP over the last few weeks are starting to reduce that gap between those two figures. The key of our collective action is that in the next few days before the closure of this COP, we need to have enough commitment to be able to go back to this 1.5 temperature rise rather than us going back to national strategies which decredibilize these objectives. We need to speed up our strategies between now and 2030. That first ambition strategy we need to recover is ambition. This is what carries our national strategies, and the figures speak volumes about this. We all need to have strategies that match the 1.5 increase maximum. That needs to be embodied in our national strategies. In this respect, France, but more broadly the European Union, as well as the United Kingdom, are today ready to meet their commitments. Our challenge is now to implement our commitments, and I do not underestimate the importance or the difficulty thereof. We today have a challenge before us, namely the implementation of the Green Deal at European level of our national strategies. But the figures we have committed ourselves to are those which will enable us to give credibility to this a target of 1.5. So energy transition, economic model transition. This transition must be fair, just, and supported by social decisions. This transition will make it possible also for us to be able to create new opportunities, new jobs through, in particular, deep innovations, the building of new sectors, of new industries and new opportunities. That is what we are doing. That is what we are focusing our efforts on. We're implementing all of this nationally and at European level. But in addition to that, the key of the next 2 weeks at COP is this: the largest emitters whose national strategies do not match our strategy of 1.5 increase, those countries responsible for most emissions must scale up in the next 2 weeks their ambitions. That would be the only way for us to give credibility back to our strategy and for us to have strategies between now and 2030 which will make it possible for this 1.5 target to be credible. Number two, solidarity. During the pandemic, we've all experienced this solidarity. People have just referred to it. Now, we cannot meet these international challenges unless we are coordinated, unless we act together. The context we're in is a context in which climate change, to a certain extent, is injustice squared. It's the most poor countries in Africa, in the Caribbean, in the Pacific, who are the first victims of climate change. They are those who are very often the ones who do not implement the development model are the subject of climate change. SIDS, indigenous peoples, suffer the effects of climate change. And the second key target of this COP is 100 billion per year dedicated to combat climate change. France and the European Union are now have met their commitment and even exceeded them. Europe is going to spend 25 billion per year. We've raised our France spends over 7 billion per year, over a third of what a third dedicated to adaptation. But all developed economies must now contribute their fair share because the leadership demands us to give an example. If we want to be leaders, we need to give the example. We need to find all means to ensure that the richest countries speed up this financing, because we've committed ourselves to put on the table this $100 billion per year between 2020 and 2025 before we put even more on the table subsequently. I would like to appeal to those countries who are not contributing what they should today to meet their responsibilities between now and the end of COP so that we can fulfill this obligation that we undertook in Paris. And if we have to find measures that will correct our course with the IMF, we can mobilize in addition to the G20 agreement, in addition to the special drawing rights, which will thus be used by the poorest countries or the countries of middle income. This is a crucial matter. This solidarity must happen because it makes action possible wherever solutions to reduce emissions exist. A wonderful example was given over the last few weeks with the support we collectively found to help South Africa to reduce its carbon dependence, or coal dependence. It's this model of cooperation we need to build our strategy on. This agreement shows us that we can meet the challenges of fair, equitable and ambitious transition. The third value I was referring to earlier on, ladies and gentlemen, is trust and transparency. Our youth were invited to join our debates. They want to see us commit ourselves. They want us to follow up. They want things to be measurable. So beyond these commitments, we must follow with rigor and transparency in a common framework what we do. We need to monitor what we do. I'm delighted in that respect that the OECD is launching at COP26 the International Programme for Climate Action, IPAC, we began that in last December. Thanks to this, we'll be able to follow country by country what everyone is doing and what remains to be done. I very much hope that we'll be able to go further altogether. OECD must follow up and every year draft a report on full transparency of the use of the $100 billion and how they have been appropriated. Today, we're almost certain that the countries of Africa, of the Pacific, Latin America and the Caribbean who need them the most are not those countries that are receiving the most. We know that is the case. So beyond our announcements, we need to be transparent as to the follow-up, the monitoring of how these $100 billion will be spent. Ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to speak to you about these three values so that this COP can be a success. If we mobilize and decide and act, it will be a success. Just one thing to conclude. Beyond all of these announcements, all of this will only make progress if we are consistent, if we manage to link this agenda against climate change and two other agendas, namely biodiversity and trade. Biodiversity, first of all, because we know today that these agendas are linked. Biodiversity is our best ally to combat climate change, global warming, and will help us to find natural carbon sinks and solutions. Thanks to it, we'll be able to give, especially to Africa, its full role in this battle. The tropical forests must be protected. That is consistent. That is a crucial element. And several of my colleagues from Africa who will speak after me are promoters, eminent promoters thereof. The Great Wall, Green Wall, defended by the Mauritanian president, is a key element thanks to which we'll be able to combat not only desertification, but also propose solutions that are economic, trade solutions, and our mobilizations for the oceans. It must happen also. This agenda goes hand in hand, is intricately linked with the agenda to combat climate change. Finally, we must be consistent with our trade frameworks, our trade environment, and our environment and climate frameworks. Too many of us here commit ourselves and then sign contradictory trade agreements. We cannot continue to have a planet that we are causing to function according to rules that do not embody at their heart these constraints. Our trade agreements must reflect our climate commitments. The organization of our value chains must reflect our climate requirements, demands. And that is why I appeal to people today for us to develop in Africa and in the Caribbean and in South America And in all of these vulnerable regions, solutions and industrial pathways, industries to meet challenges rather than continue to provide solutions that come from the end of the other end of the world and which are built upon our current financial models. Our solidarity through these $100 billion must make it possible for people to develop these industries which are regional economic opportunities. These are the few words I wanted to share with you. It is what we do, it is what we produce, is what we monitor transparently that will give full confidence, trust back to our youth, but which will also allow us to act properly and achieve the results we need for ourselves and for future generations. These are the few elements of my own convictions I wanted to share with you this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Ali Bongo Ondimba, President of Gabon. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Winston Churchill said, "You should never turn your back on a danger or try to run away from it. If you do that, you'll multiply it by 2. But if you face it quickly, you will halve it in size." 50 years later, 20 years after Rio, COP26 should mark the beginning of a new age of climate integrity. Our current efforts are insufficient. Our NDCs demonstrate that our emissions will continue to increase between now and 2030. The latest report of the IPCC instructs us to reduce them by at least 40% over that same period. The hour is late, but nothing is lost yet. We must do everything we can to fill in the gap and to reach the goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius. Gabon is doing its share with the adoption of an innovative law on climate change.
Gentlemen, Gabon is the most carbon-positive country on Earth, net absorbing more than 100 million tons of CO2 every year. I plan to keep it that way and will submit a new NDC post-Glasgow. I call on countries that are not on track, particularly the 20 nations that represent 80% of global emissions, to submit new NDCs in line with 1.5 degrees. We must establish a Marshall Plan on climate. We need to rebuild trust by honoring the pledge of $100 billion per year. This symbolic commitment will need to be multiplied tenfold beyond 2025 in order to meet the real needs of developing countries. We must clearly define our common adaptation goal. Even if we achieve the 1.5 degrees target, climate change will still entail enormous costs. Finally, we must demonstrate strong leadership to all those who are watching us, in particular to future generations. I call on all negotiators to be flexible and to finalize the Paris Agreement's rules book. Under no circumstances should we allow ourselves to relieve Madrid's frustration. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Juan Orlando Hernandez, President of Honduras. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Damas y caballeros, ladies and gentlemen, when life is at stake, human life that is, and the life of our planet, then we have this saying which is relevant to us. And this saying is, hope is the last thing that we lose. I wouldn't want this event to be just another one of our events. We need results today, not tomorrow. In my country, Honduras, since the 70s, or between the 1970s and 2020, there were 82 natural disasters that were recorded, out of which 67 were climate change induced. According to ECLAC, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, it's a UN body, these disasters are unprecedented, and it is because of climate change, and they have caused losses of $6 billion. And what is even worse than that, 22,000 people have died as a result of them. 11,000 have disappeared. And of course, the lives of millions of families in Honduras have been affected, some of whom have lost everything in the process, as a result of which they are forced, or they decide, to emigrate because of climate change. Just in 2020, at the height of the pandemic, in less than 2 weeks, we were buffeted by 2 hurricanes who were called, respectively, Eta and Iota. As a result of the ravages of these hurricanes, that's notwithstanding the terrible effects of the pandemic, the loss and damage was $2.1 billion, which amounts to 9.2 of our own GDPs. And that's not me saying it. It's the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean of the United Nations saying it. Just imagine what that would mean for countries such as Germany or the US or the UK to lose 9.2% of their GDP. Well, I can tell you what it would mean. For Germany, would mean $350 billion. For the US, it would be $1.9 trillion, and for the UK, it would be $243 billion. I'm telling you these figures for you to get an idea of the scale of what we have experienced through these tragedies. So let us compare figures here. We have lost, over the last 50 years, around $6 billion. And we're expected to receive, in exchange, a pittance from these discussions. Is this fair, is my question? Where is the environmental compensation that the international community has promised so often? We're also affected by droughts. Between 2014 and 2021, drought generated annual economic losses of $453 million, which is the equivalent of 1.7% of our GDP, which has given rise to food insecurity and nutritional insecurity, which we need to solve regularly. We need to deal with it regularly. How can we, therefore, prosper as we wish if every year our economic progress and social development are both devoured by the environmental emergency? And what is most frustrating is this. It is to come to these summits and many others and to see that things remain either unchanged or get worse. So I wonder, I'm wondering to myself today, why are we here? Why do we come to these climate summits and we talk about theories, but we never see concrete results? The G20 in Rome recently worked out that the richest countries of the world produce around 80% of the global CO2 emissions or environmental pollution emissions. However, Honduras suffers the effects of this pollution. We are one of the 8 most vulnerable countries of the world that is vulnerable to climate change. Let me be clear about this. We We are not adding to global pollution, and yet, and we suffer the effects thereof. And we have some of in the region the most nature reserves. Now, with our nationally determined contributions, we have been ambitious. But I have faith and I have hope. I have hope that these major events will no longer be organized just to look good to the international community and to the peoples of the world, because now is our last opportunity. Our last opportunity for this summit to be something actually effective. Fewer words and more actions. Once again, as we say in Honduras, hope is the last thing to go. More so when what is at stake is the life of the planet and the life of human beings. Our government is doing its utmost through public investment in climate of around almost $2 billion a year, only 5% of which comes from loans or grants. Honduras, through its Sustainable Development and National Plan for Reconstruction and Sustainable Development, is considering a multiple dam national program to combat floods, but also to provide drinking water and to produce energy for our citizens. We are also building over 5,000 homes for the families who have been displaced and who are being replaced, reallocated in safe places. I could go on and on about what we are doing, but I would just like to conclude by saying the following. As far as climate change is concerned, the outcome must happen today and not tomorrow. There is no more chance for that to happen. And in Honduras, we're not just thinking about the future of our sons and daughters and grandchildren. For 20 years now, we have been losing lives, including last year we lost lives. This year we have lost lives. Time is running out, so please, may these 2 weeks be productive. Once again, I have faith and I have hope that it will be the case. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta, President of Kenya. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a key priority during Kenya's tenure at the United Nations Security Council is to amplify the voice of Africa and the Global South in building a compelling case for the nexus between climate change and security. And this is because we recognize that climate change is escalating and complicating new and old conflicts throughout the world. The evidence, ladies and gentlemen, is irrefutable. All the reports, including the most recent Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, sounded an alarm bell that the world risks facing a global catastrophe unless leaders shift gear on climate change. We need to urgently implement bold mitigation and adaptation measures to avert the looming crisis. It is the least that we can do to bequeath a peaceful and sustainable planet to future generations. Climate change poses an existential threat to Kenya and to most countries in the African continent. In Kenya, extreme weather events, including floods and droughts, lead to losses of between 3 and 5% of our GDP annually. Further, they aggravate food insecurity and trigger divisive intra-community and inter-country competition for resources. Kenya has developed a robust climate change action plan to scale up efforts and to maintain a low-carbon development trajectory. The plan includes commitment to restore degraded water towers, accelerate forest restoration, and to increase our tree cover to at least 10% of our land area in order to promote a sustainable blue economy, but also promoting green manufacturing. Indeed, as many of you know, Kenya is a pace setter in the energy sector. We are among the top 8 global leaders in geothermal power development and home to the largest wind power project on the African continent. Currently, close to 90% of the electricity used by Kenyans is from renewable energy sources, and we plan to achieve 100% renewable energy by the year 2030. As you can see, ladies and gentlemen, Kenya is doing her fair share. Let me, however, hasten to add that these are mere baby steps relative to the enormity of the climate change challenge. Kenya came to this meeting with high expectations that COP26 will deliver on at least 4 critical issues. First, to see an increase in ambition in emissions reduction. The major emitters must make more ambitious their emission reduction commitments. We all must harness low-carbon investment opportunities as we reboot our economies. Second, we would like to see a quantum increase in climate finance. 2 times in a row, developing countries have been promised US $100 billion per year, but this has yet to be delivered. Today, once again, yet another pledge of 2023. Third, we would like to see ambition on adaptation and loss and damage. With climate impacts increasing, provisions to help the most vulnerable to adapt, including through increased financial support, should be strengthened. Finally, we expect that detailed rules and procedures for implementing the Paris Agreement will be finalized, and a clear way forward for climate-resilient pathways set. We also expect that the agreement will be sufficiently inclusive to accommodate the needs and priorities of developing countries, and in particular, the special needs and circumstances of Africa, which has been very ably put forward earlier and very well articulated by Elizabeth Wahote, the young girl who spoke to us earlier. Indeed, the findings of the international scientific community, including the recent report on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, on the physical science and basis of climate change, underscore the special needs and circumstances of Africa, contribute to the vulnerability and the low adaptive capacity of African countries to climate change. The IPCC further notes that even with scaled-up global climate action, it will not be possible to avoid and to reduce all loss and damage from the impacts of climate change, and that by 2030, the economic costs of loss and damage in developing countries is expected to be between US $290 billion and US $580 billion. Throughout Africa, as the most vulnerable continent to the impacts of climate change, countries are already experiencing loss and damage of an increasing magnitude and frequency. We are therefore deeply concerned to hear that yesterday, during the adoption of the agenda for this conference, the item on the special needs and circumstances of Africa was yet again not adopted. And we expect the COP President to undertake extensive and comprehensive consultations and address the special needs and circumstances of African states, and indeed report back to us before the close of the session of the conference. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, our own Kenyan Eliud Kipchoge the greatest marathoner of all time and our climate champion, and who will be attending this conference, has demonstrated to us that in a race against time, no human is limited. We have the means and the ability to protect our planet from climate change-related destruction and to secure peace and stability for all. What we need now is to recognize that we are in a race against time, and we need unanimity of purpose, we need boldness and unwavering political commitment to achieve the 1.5-degree pathway. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much.
Dear Mr. Chairman, dear heads of state and government, this summer, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change published its 6th report. It features research and projections by leading climate scientists on 4,000 pages. The book by William Jevons, The Coal Question, is much slimmer, and it is 150 years older. But what's in common between the two is a similar paradox. Increasing the efficiency of using a resource increases rather than reduces its consumption. Paradoxically, the implementation of the Paris Agreement is under threat from the implementation of the Paris Agreement itself. It is because of this goal to contain global warming within 2 or preferably 1.5 degrees and cut greenhouse gas emissions while reducing oil and gas consumption. This has caused a surge in demand for natural gas. As a result, prices have hit record highs. In its turn, coal consumption has grown 5% among the G20 nations, while rising by 1/3 across the coal-fired power plants of Europe as of September. As a result, there is a shortage of coal now. The same is true of oil. The sector is expected to continue switching from natural gas to those two, which is bound to result in increased emissions. According to the UN, the atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide, methane and nitrous oxide have reached their 10-year maximums. The Earth's temperatures, however, may rise way beyond 2 degrees. New calculations prove we'll have to make considerably greater efforts to achieve carbon neutrality than we anticipated in Paris back in 2015. Congratulations, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, Ukraine became one of the first European nations to ratify the Paris Agreement. By the scale of emissions reduction achieved, Ukraine ranks 4th among the 45 parties to the UN Framework Convention. Our goal is to reduce emissions by 65% by 2030 and achieve, not later than 2060, carbon neutrality. Ukraine has supported a number of initiatives of this conference, namely the Forests and Land Use Declaration. It is critical for us to secure access to reliable long-term financing, in particular as part of the Green Climate Fund. Dear friends, the Nobel laureate, Professor Perez, has neatly encapsulated the goal of the Glasgow conference. What we need is powerful solutions and urgent action. The latter deserves special attention. Back in 1992, we signed the UN Convention to stabilize greenhouse gas emissions. 3 years later, we agreed that just wasn't enough. We needed firm commitments. Those were established by the 1997 Kyoto Protocol, capping emissions into the atmosphere. The protocol entered into force 8 years after it was adopted in 2005. 6 years later, we decided to replace it with a new agreement. In 2015, we signed the Paris Agreement, and we agreed that we would begin implementing it in 5 years' time, that is in 2020. That is the pace at which we've been responding to environmental threats. The hurricanes Katrina and Sandy, the bleaching of the Great Barrier Reef, the earthquakes in Haiti and the Indian Ocean, the tsunamis, the floods, the wildfires, the droughts, all over the globe. Even the anomalous rainfall that flooded Glasgow 2 days before the climate summit are not acting as wake-up calls urging us to act. In my opinion, to overcome global warming, what we need is global warming. In relations between nations where trust is melting away with every passing year. Agreements are worth nothing if for some people they're just empty words. This applies to both environmental treaties and other agreements unrelated to the environment. You know, back in 1994, Ukraine received security guarantees that were unfortunately never complied with. And the planet ended up with 2 environmental time bombs in the center of Europe, an occupied Crimea and parts of the Ukrainian Donbass. A peninsula, Crimea, with unique flora and fauna, has been turned into a Russian Navy base. And in parts of the Donbass, we've seen mines flooding, soil erosion, and a dearth of potable water. And this is happening as we speak. This is a shared threat for the whole world. In these times, a disaster, wherever it may strike, I'm confident affects us all. This is best exemplified by the explosion at the Chernobyl nuclear plant, from which not only Ukraine suffered, but dozens of countries all over the globe. This tragedy proves yet another truth. Probably the single most effective action we can think of to help nature recover is for humans to not intervene. Nature in Chernobyl is recovering much faster, a lot faster than expected, as if to suggest that the best course of action that humans can take to help is just stay away. Well, we shouldn't, of course, take it literally and do nothing. We could give up, though. Then we'd have floods and fires every week. We would only swim in the sea wearing a Class A suit and spend the rest of our lives wearing a face mask while only getting rations of drinking water at weekends and food grown on non-toxic land only at Christmas or special occasions, while the average life expectancy globally would drop to 25 or 30 years. Perhaps this would be mankind's fair retribution for us, for those who have forgotten that this is our planet, and for those who have forgotten that that is not our planet. This is the planet of the polar bears, of the tigers, pandas and koalas, of the whales and the sharks. They cannot hold their own summit. They cannot decide to abandon plastics or reduce CO2 emissions. They can't do any of that. It's only up to us to rectify this. It is the causes, in my opinion, that should be addressed. Not the symptoms. We shouldn't change the principles of production or use of mineral resources, but global thinking, global behavior, priorities of world politics and of each individual state. We must measure not only economic growth, but first and foremost environmental progress and development, not GDP growth or inflation rate, but above all the purity of air, water and soil. We need to view any geography not as a potential market for goods and services, but as a habitat, a home for thousands of species of flora and fauna. To be proud not of new makes of machinery, or not as much of the fact that we're creating something, but of the fact that we are preserving something important. A lot has been said. It's time to move from talking the talk to walking the walk. Quickly, without delay, together without exceptions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Abdel El-Sisi, President of Egypt. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to be with you here to deliberate on climate, the issue that affects us all. The most recent IPCC report indicated that enhancing climate action to reach the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal has become a necessity that cannot be delayed. In this context, I'll focus today on the following points. First, Egypt initiated several serious steps to implement a sustainable development model with addressing climate change and adapting to its negative impact at its start, with the goal of government-financed green projects reaching 50% of total projects by 2025 and 100% by 2030. For example, renewable energy constitutes today about 20% of Egypt's energy mix, with the aim of reaching 42% by 2035, in conjunction with rationalizing energy subsidies. In addition, Egypt is currently undergoing a shift to clean transport through expanding its metro network, laying out a new electric railway network, incentivizing the use of electric cars, as well as laying the needed infrastructure. Furthermore, several new sustainable smart cities are currently being developed. Canals are being lined all over the country. To finance these projects, Egypt just recently issued green bonds worth $750 million. And to put all these efforts into their proper institutional framework, Egypt's new National Climate Change Strategy 25 has just been finalized, paving the way to updating our NDCs in a manner that would make the policies, goals, and procedures therein supplementary to our development efforts and our COVID recovery plans, rather than hindering them. Second, as much as Egypt is cognizant of its commitments, it is also aware of the challenges faced by all developing countries. I would like here to emphasize on the fact that developing countries' ability to deliver on their climate change commitments is subject to the support these countries receive, especially with regards to climate finance. The cornerstone for our countries' ability to raise their ambitions and enhance their action in the context of the delicate balance of the Paris Agreement. This balance must be preserved to allow for all mitigation and adaptation efforts to move forward on equal footing. We remain concerned over the gap between available finance and the actual needs of developing countries, added to the challenge faced by our countries to access this finance. To this effect, it is imperative that developed countries fulfill their pledge to provide $100 billion annually to climate finance in developing countries, and we support the call by the UN Secretary General to designate no less than half of that finance to adaptation efforts, and the importance of starting consultations on the new post-2025 financial goal. Third, despite not being responsible for the current climate crisis, Africa faces its most negative economic, social, political, and security impacts. Nevertheless, African countries are an example of serious climate action insofar as its capabilities and the support it receives. To this effect, Egypt calls for a special treatment of the African continent under the Paris Agreement implementation with respect to its special circumstances and the numerous challenges it faces. Ladies and gentlemen, I am confident that the results of this summit will reflect our political commitment to addressing climate change and adapting to its negative impacts. I am also confident that this will resonate with our delegations as they embark on negotiating the issues on the session's agenda, motivating them to reach positive results. I would also like to welcome the Glasgow Breakthrough Agenda and the reports it will produce, and reiterate our support to the British presidency of COP26. We intend to work with the UK in the weeks and months ahead, leading to COP27, which we look forward to host on behalf of the African continent in Egypt. We will work throughout our presidency towards enhancing global climate action and reaching the goals of the Paris Agreement for the benefit of the people of Africa and the entire world. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Stevo Pandorovsky, President of North Macedonia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you. Your Excellencies, dear friends, with the pandemic still dominating the world's agenda, we should not underestimate one of the greatest systemic risks ever posed to the humanity. Scientists say there might be only 1 decade left for the world to fundamentally redesign its development paradigms, to change our life habits and construct our economies on a sustainable basis. If we ignore these worrying trends, catastrophic consequences will follow for the environment, health, food and water security, in fact for the overall human safety and development. So what we promised in Paris, we must deliver here in Glasgow. As EU candidate country ready to start negotiations, North Macedonia has already been transposing European climate acquis in its national legislation. By supporting the European Green Deal, we are committed to do our share in turning Europe into the first carbon-neutral continent by 2050. Despite the fact that we are a small European country, we have great climate ambitions. To this end, we adopted the enhanced national determined contributions. Our target for 2030 is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 51% compared to 1990 levels, or 82% in net emissions compared to the same base year. We designed 63 mitigation policies and measures which are gender responsive and are linked to 15 sustainable development goals. By implementing our long-term strategy on climate action, we aim to transform North Macedonia into a low-carbon economy, enhancing competitiveness and promoting social cohesion. This whole-of-society approach will help us fight unemployment by creating green jobs, decrease pollution with renewables, and develop sustainable habits through education. We have made these commitments against the backdrop of several structural challenges to our domestic economic growth, worsened by the devastating effects of COVID-19, because we do believe that the only sustainable recovery from the pandemic is green recovery. If the country with the GDP per capita of below $6,000 is fully dedicated to achieving these ambitious pledges, then each state in the world can do it. We have already designed transparent, coordinated and inclusive climate action in partnership with science, businesses, civil society and youth. In the same time, we are fully aware that international financing will be dependent on the effective, functional and just governance at both national and international levels. Dear friends, 50 years ago, W.H. Auden penned the hymn to the United Nations. In it, he says that peace means to change at the right time, as the world clock goes tick and tock. For too long, humanity's unsustainable models of production and consumption have been out of sync with the rhythm of nature. At this last hour, it is high time to wind back the clock of the climate system, so that future generations can not only survive, but live in a secure, decent, and prosperous world as well. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Luis Arce, President of Bolivia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Bolivia has been actively involved over the last few years in the negotiation process to tackle or to come up with a final solution to the world's climate crisis. And in this context, it has ratified the Paris Agreement in 2015. However, we are frustrated when we see that there is still that we still haven't come up with a global solution, a comprehensive solution to the climate crisis, which has become the most pressing problem we need to face to defend humanity and to defend the life of Mother Earth. The scientific studies, as well as the reports issued by the Secretariat of the United Nations Framework on Climate Change, show that countries are very far from the targets that need to be met for us to be able to tackle the world's climate crisis. The capitalistic global system based on consumerism, unfettered consumerism, and irrational exploitation of the planet and of the atmosphere cannot come up with solutions to solve the climate crisis unless there is a strong paradigm shift in the economic and social system of the world. The developed countries are just biding their time without facing any sense of responsibility towards humanity or towards Mother Earth, and their credibility is at peril. The developed countries are coming up with speeches that portray them as champions for to combat climate change and to address emissions by 2050, but this is far from being the truth. If the developed countries want to be leaders in the fight against the climate crisis, then they need to promote a distribution of the space, the airspace, on the base of shared but common but shared responsibilities, common but differentiated responsibilities, and they need to face their historic responsibilities. Developed countries must come up with reductions in the context or to meet the temperature rise targets agreed in Paris. They must also meet their responsibilities to transfer financial resources and means of implementation to developing countries. We must be aware of the fact that developed countries are promoting a new global recolonization process, which we could call the new carbon colonialism. I say this because they're attempting to impose the rules of the game, their own rules of the game, to continue to fuel the new green capitalistic system and to enforce these rules of the game upon us, with us having no option. We will not solve the climate crisis with more green capitalism and more global carbon markets. We need to change the civilization model we have and head towards an alternative model, an alternative to capitalism, which is the concept of living properly together in harmony with Mother Earth. In Bolivia, we are putting together a NDC for 2030, which attests to our national commitment to combat climate change in the areas of water, energy, and forests and agriculture. It's designed for us to make progress in providing funds and other means of implementation to drive forward or to scale up what we're doing nationally, domestically, to meet our mitigation, adaptation and comprehensive development goals for our countries. If the current generations we do not resolve the climate crisis, then this will be something that will be impossible to solve for the next generations. The leadership of developed countries is crucial for this global solution to be resolved with a high sense of responsibility, common responsibility for us to defend Mother Earth, which is the same thing as defending life. Hayaya, Mother Earth. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa, President of Sri Lanka. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Chairperson, Excellencies, delegates. This event takes place at a critical time for humanity. As a developing tropical island nation with abundant biodiversity, Sri Lanka is deeply aware of the impacts of climate change. Our rich philosophical heritage, shaped by Lord Buddha's teachings, places great value on environmental integrity. Sustainability is therefore at the heart of our national policy framework. Sri Lanka's updated nationally determined contributions aims to reduce emissions towards achieving carbon neutrality by 2050. We have prioritized enhancing national forest cover with initiatives underway to increase our carbon sequestration capacity by 7% by 2030. We will increase contribution of renewable energy sources to 70% of national energy needs by 2030 and are taking steps to phase out use of fossil fuels. Sri Lanka is also proud to be a co-lead of the Global Energy Compact for no new coal power. Sri Lanka recently restricted imports of chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and weedicides due to public health concerns, water contamination, soil degradation, and biodiversity impacts. Although opposed by entrenched lobbies, this has created opportunities for innovation and investment into organic agriculture that will be healthier and more sustainable in future. Reactive nitrogen emissions from overuse of artificial fertilizer is a major change. In 2019, Sri Lanka spearheaded the Colombo Declaration on Sustainable Nitrogen Management, which seeks to have nitrogen waste by 2030. We look forward to more countries joining this initiative. Sri Lanka also leads the Action Group on Mangrove Ecosystems and Livelihoods under the Commonwealth Blue Charter initiative. Sri Lanka welcomes investments, technology transfers, and climate financing for its ambitious sustainability efforts, along with broader development assistance to support recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Climate change affects all nations, but disproportionately impacts developing island nations. Developing nations that take bold steps towards climate change mitigation and adaptation deserve extensive support. It is essential that the world's largest emitters of greenhouse gases fulfill their national commitments and assist developing nations navigate through the climate crisis. I call upon all nations to work together in a spirit of true cooperation to overcome this crisis and sustain humanity and our planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Milo Jukanovic, President of Montenegro. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Your Excellencies, it is a great honor to address you on behalf of Montenegro. This year's COP26, organized in the circumstances of the pandemic, is a great achievement. I would therefore first like to thank the host, the Government of the United Kingdom. This is yet another confirmation of the fact that if we respect the rules and strict restrictions, and if we are willing to sacrifice the comfort we are used to, and if we do it together with solidarity, we can achieve our goal. I believe it is the best path to ensure the most effective response to climate change, through common responsibility, solidarity and cooperation, through multilateralism. International public has high expectations. Everything that we have done so far has not been sufficient to prevent increase of emissions. Climate change and loss of biodiversity are existential threats. Devastating effects of the pandemic make the situation additionally complex. Warming of our planet is faster than we hoped, and it is only human hand that can make the move slow that process down. National responsibility and responsibility to global community lead us to do what we have to do and what we have already committed to achieve. Save the planet and ensure more secure, greener and more sustainable future. We confirmed our last year's climate ambition. Montenegro submitted its updated nationally determined contribution to emission reduction of 35% by 2030. Still, we are here today to show our willingness to go beyond what we know we can, to confirm that we are ready and that we have faith to go faster and to be more demanding for common benefit. Montenegro undertook to share the climate ambition and to be climate neutral together with the EU by 2050. Integration into EU is the strategic course of our country, and Montenegro will do everything to succeed. By the end of 2021, we will update emissions inventory in line with the new methodology of the Intergovernmental Panel. By the end of 2023, we will finalize the first draft of the National Energy and Climate Plan. Early in 2024, we will complete the National Adaptation Plan. We will intensify our work on the adoption of the low-carbon development strategy and join the group of states that actively plan and define policies and measures for reduction and mitigation of climate change. With the next update of the nationally determined contribution, we will go a step further. We believe that it will include additional reduction of 5%, which will be the total of 40%. We want Montenegro to be a regional role model for successful green transition. We believe that it is possible to achieve climate change and energy goals, development goals, and European integration goals at the same time. I am here to express our clear determination and commitment. The political will that we are confirming here today has to be translated into a prompt climate action. This is the last opportunity to put things under control, and we cannot afford to waste it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Jae-in Moon, President of the Republic of Korea. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Your Excellency Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Executive Secretary Patricia Espinosa of the UNFCCC, Excellencies. Oak tree forests in Glasgow lead us into the world of mythology where humans, animals, plants live in harmony. Nature has long been waiting for us. Now it is our turn to act and return love to nature. COP26 will mark a starting point, which I hope will set us on a course to stop further global warming and respond to nature that has been so patient with us. I stand here today to make 3 promises and 1 proposal. First, the Republic of Korea is enhancing its 2030 NDC targets to cut greenhouse gas emissions by at least 40% from 2018 levels. This is a bold target that has been raised some 14% from the existing one, a Herculean task indeed that demands steep emission cuts over a short time horizon. Never an easy undertaking, yet the Korean people decided we must act now. Korea cemented its 2050 net zero commitment into law and announced its carbon neutrality scenarios. We are also pledging to lower methane emissions by 30% by 2030. Methane, a much more potent greenhouse gas than CO2, holds the key to tackling the climate crisis. Korea will join the Global Methane Pledge to actively participate in methane reduction efforts. Second, as the only country that has successfully rehabilitated its forests since World War II, Korea will drive cooperation in forest restoration. Trees are carbon sinks that live and breathe. Growing trees and bringing forests back to life offers a vital solution to the climate crisis. It also shows us the way to avert desertification and promote peace in border areas. Korea welcomes the Glasgow Leaders' Declaration on Forest and Land Use and promises to fully cooperate in rejuvenating forests in developing countries. Moreover, through inter-Korean forestry cooperation, we will strive to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions across the entire Korean peninsula. In May next year, Korea will host the World Forestry Congress, and I ask for the global community's support and cooperation for its success. Third, Korea pledges to join the global endeavors to reduce the use of coal. Since the launch of my government, Korea has decommissioned 8 coal-fired power plants earlier than scheduled, with 2 more planned for closure by year-end. By 2050, coal power generation will be phased out completely. We already stopped issuing permits for new domestic coal power plants, and in April, suspended public financing for new overseas coal power generation as well. Korea will fully cooperate with developing countries in their transition to a low-carbon economy, including development of renewable energies. Korea will also reduce carbon footprint of Korean businesses operating abroad. Through the Green Climate Fund and the Global Green Growth Institute, we will continue providing climate finance and utilizing the Climate Technology Center and Network, step up our cooperation with developing countries in green technology. Excellencies, one proposal I'm making is to hold the Youth for Climate on a regular basis. Carbon neutrality is a challenging task that governments and businesses can hardly accomplish on their own. It is a goal that is achievable only when every citizen joins in. If our future generations who are directly affected by the climate crisis work together with older generations to find solutions, we will be able to advance faster towards building a sustainable world. For regular convening of the Youth for Climate, I ask the leaders for their keen interest and support. For Mother Nature, let people hold hands with one another and countries join hands together. We should never regret that we did not act soon enough for our planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Faustin Archangi to Adera, President of the Central African Republic. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Madame la Présidente,
Madam President, Excellencies, Heads of State, Heads of Government, ladies and gentlemen, the Central African Republic, my country, is honored to take part in this global last chance meeting, thanks to which we have become aware of our environment's vulnerability and aware of the need for us to adopt very restrictive measures to combat climate change. My country has gigantic natural resources which are insufficiently exploited. And despite the media campaigns to spread misinformation about the CAR, my country is making progress along the path of peace building and democracy building and contributes significantly to greenhouse gas reduction and the capture of CO2. The Central African Republic is working closely together with the member states of the COMIFAC, the Central African Forestry Commission. This COMIFAC is an ambitious institution designed to manage the Basin of the Congo and protect its forests. The Basin of the Congo is the second largest forest range of the planet after the Amazon, and we have been firm in the determination of our nationally determined contributions. Ladies and gentlemen, climate change and COVID-19 are today global challenges which can only be met and overcome if we act through multilateralism and through proactive international solidarity. The CAR would like to see COP26 adopting the following in its outcome. Number one, we would like to see reflected the need for developed countries to provide financial resources to support effective and efficient implementation of NDCs by developing countries. Number two, we would like to see the operationalization of the global adaptation objective, including the development of indicators designed to operationalize adaptation goal, such as the improvement of adaptation capacity, the strengthening of climate resilience, and the reduction of vulnerability to provide an adequate and urgent response to climate change in the context of the temperature target. Number three, the need to finalize pending mandates left over from COP15 in Paris. Sorry, COP21 in Paris, so that we can fully implement the Paris Agreement. Ladies and gentlemen, we will win this wager to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and stabilize the temperature at between 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Denis Sassou Nguesso, President of the Congo. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Madame la Présidente,
Madam President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, allow me at the outset to express my sincere thanks to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II and to the government and the people of the United Kingdom for the hospitality and the warm welcome that they have shown my delegation and me personally. Allow me also as President of the Congo Basin Climate Commission, a body that brings together 16 Central and East African states, as well as the Kingdom of Morocco, to convey the importance that we attach to this COP26, which is particularly crucial for the future of humanity. My country, the Republic of Congo, is located at the heart of the Congo Basin, a vast expanse of forest and of peat bogs, which today is the #1 net carbon sink in the world, following the deforestation of the Amazon. The peat bogs of the Central Basin alone store 31 billion tons of carbon, or 3 years of global emissions. The place that the Congo Basin occupies in implementing the goals of the Paris Agreement is therefore absolutely vital. As you will have clearly understood, the Congo Basin provides the world with incalculable ecosystem services. But what does it get in return? Unfortunately, very little. Industrialized countries who have historic responsibility for the disruption of the climate are proving to be reluctant to mobilize the financing needed to make their pledges a reality. The major difficulties faced in the application of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which commits rich countries to supporting the mitigation and, above all, the adaptation efforts of developing countries, is clear evidence of this. The Republic of Congo, for its part, has already submitted to the Convention Secretariat its nationally determined contribution, which has been revised. Our ambitions, which take into account all sectors that emit greenhouse gases, have been revised up, and the Republic of Congo is a star pupil in the global environment rankings. As I have said at every opportunity since the 1992 Rio Summit, the determination of the countries of the Congo Basin in general, and the Republic of Congo in particular, to preserve this vast area is absolute. However, this commitment goes hand in hand with the equally absolute will to pursue our economic and social development for the well-being of our populations. These two goals are not exclusive, they are complementary. Demanding that we slow down our development so that the planet can breathe easier would be profoundly unjust and even immoral. For that reason, allow me here, once again, to advocate for the Blue Fund, which is a shared initiative of the member countries of the Congo Basin Climate Commission, together with the Kingdom of Morocco. An initiative that now only needs to be financed with the pledges of all our partners. By taking the decision to protect and to conserve the Congo Basin for the good of humanity, we have been able to shoulder our responsibilities. It is now up to everyone to shoulder theirs. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Charles Michel, President of the European Council, and Her Excellency Ms. Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, European Union. Your Excellencies, you have the floor.
Madame la Présidente,
Madam President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we, the human race, triggered a war against nature. We, the human race, are responsible for this climate change, which seriously threatens our security and the security of future generations, and it is up to us, the human race, to put an end to this threat, to reverse the trend, and to give future back to future generations, hope back to future generations. And that means that we need to radically change our prosperity paradigm, to radically change our cooperation paradigm. Science says this strongly and clearly, and in Europe and elsewhere, the young generations have awoken our consciences. The young, committed, informed activists are right to mobilize. They are right to demand more of us, and it is our duty and responsibility to not to be found wanting. The EU is hearing this call and wishes to be fully mobilized, first of all by setting ambitious targets. We were the first 2 years ago to state our ambition, our climate ambition for to strengthen our 2030 targets and to set up legally binding frameworks that root in these objectives into our laws. The Green Deal package, namely the mobilization of public financing, the importance of channeling private financing, should be fully used also. This climate transition, ladies and gentlemen, this commitment must not lead to us sacrificing the most vulnerable and the most fragile. That is true in our societies. We must provide support measures so that everybody's on board. Everybody is turned towards this target. And this is also true internationally. That is why we are proud as Europeans to honor this commitment of this $100 billion for countries who most need the funding. And we encourage all our partners in developed countries to follow the European example, which we think is crucial. I would like to conclude, Madam President, by referring to Jacques Chirac in 2002. In 2002, he was right when he said the house is burning, but we're looking elsewhere more than ever. We should not avert our gaze. We must act to create trust and to meet this challenge together. Thank you.
Madam President, fellow leaders, I know that all of us here at COP26 want to be on the right side of history. And this is why I call on all of us to do whatever it takes now to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And we can do it, because climate change is man-made. Science tells us, so we can do something about it. It's our opportunity to write history even more it's our duty to act now. Europe, with its European Green Deal, will spare no effort to become the first climate-neutral continent. But at this COP, we all must speed up our race to net zero. We're running out of time, and therefore, 4 points in 1 minute. First of all, we have to give strong commitments to reduce emissions by 2030. Net zero by 2050 is good, but it's not enough. We need real action during this decade now. For Europe's this minus 55% at least, implemented and delivered. Second, we need to agree to a robust framework of rules, for example, to make global carbon markets a reality. Put a price on carbon. Nature cannot pay that price anymore. Number 3, we must mobilize climate finance for supporting vulnerable countries to adapt and leapfrog to clean growth. The European Union will fully contribute to achieve our global goals on adaptation. With close to $27 billion in 2020, Team Europe is already the largest provider of climate finance. Almost half of our finance is for adaptation. And we pledge an additional $5 billion up to 2027 from the EU budget. And we will double our funding for biodiversity, especially in vulnerable countries. And fourth and finally, innovation and technology is available. Now we have to scale up and deploy it. Fellow leaders, we must make this COP26 a success. We owe it to our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellencies. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Guy Parmeillet, President of Switzerland. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam President. Ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a child born today in my country will have to face 4 times more extreme weather events during his or her life than his or her grandparents. This child will see 5 more heat waves than I have known. As President of Switzerland, I am committed to my country and its inhabitants having the best possible prospects. As an alpine country, Switzerland is particularly affected by climate change. It is our responsibility to use every opportunity to limit this climate change, and it is this responsibility that convenes us, gathers us here in Glasgow today. In my view, COP26 must at least reach the following 3 results. First, put us back on track to limit the global warming to 1.5 degrees. Number 2, to set robust rules to implement the Paris Agreement. And finally, number 3, to mobilize the financial means we need to ensure that our common ambition becomes a reality. Dear colleagues, the current commitments are broadly insufficient to enable us to meet our target of limiting the global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. I therefore appeal to all countries, and particularly those countries that are responsible for most emissions, to aim for climate neutrality by 2050 at the latest. But that's not enough. We need to translate these long-term objectives into short-term action. That is why I appeal to all countries to submit ambitious climate objectives for 2030, which are compatible with this 1.5 degrees Celsius target. Switzerland must and wants to play its part. Switzerland reiterates today its commitment to reduce by half its global greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. Pursuant to what science tells us, Switzerland was also committed to become climate neutral by 2050. Now, Climate Strategy 2050 details this objective industry by industry. Switzerland is implementing concrete initiatives with, for example, the realization of infrastructure projects that are encouraging people to move from the road to the rail, from road to rail. The financial hub also has, the financial industry has got a role to play. Switzerland has set itself the target to make sure that all financial flows going through Switzerland are compatible with the Paris Agreement objectives, and to do so by 2050. To translate this ambition into reality, it is crucial that COP26 adopts the rules necessary to guarantee an appropriate implementation of Paris Agreement. These rules must take into account double counting of the reduction of emissions, as well as the taking into account of the reduction of emissions already carried out in the past. These rules must guarantee transparency, which is the backbone of the Paris Agreement. Finally, we need to mobilize financial means necessary to make our ambition a reality. COP26 must launch a process to define a new collective financing target for the post-2025 period and must lead us towards an effective and equitable form of financing. All the countries who can do so today must support those who need that support. Dear colleagues, I am pleased in this respect to announce a new voluntary contribution of Switzerland of around $11 million to the Adaptation Fund. Switzerland is also contributing to the fund, the LDC fund, to the tune of around $9 million. $16 million are set aside to the Climate Investment Fund. And Switzerland will pledge an additional $11 million for the High Impact Partnership for Climate Action Programme of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Finally, I am delighted to announce that our contribution around $8 million to the Coalition for Climate and Pure Air, Clean Air rather, should I say, Excellencies. And our children and our fellow citizens are watching us, and they are expecting us to adopt concrete commitments. Let us give them a reason to believe in a future that is livable and viable. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Lazarus Chakwera, President of Malawi. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Madam President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it seems to me that in the days leading up to this summit, people around the world have been asking one question about COP26. What exactly is the point of this conference? If you listen to this question very carefully, you will see that it is an indictment. When the nations we lead ask, what exactly is the point of this conference? What they are really asking is this: what is the point of having you go to COP26 on our behalf? If you are going to Glasgow for COP26, should we expect you to come back with real solutions on climate change? Or should we just ask the Scottish government to keep you for good because you are part of the problem? This is what the people in Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Malawi are asking after burying relatives they lost during Cyclone Idai. This is what the people of Haiti, Kiribati, and Philippines are asking after their children were swept away by hurricanes. This is what the people in Yemen and Lebanon are asking as they scramble for water. This is what the people of Africa are asking when you leave them with no tools for cooking than charcoal and no source of electricity except coal. And it is here that we must answer them. We must answer them with binding commitments from the G20 to cut emissions to zero, period. We must answer them with the immediate disbursement of the money pledged to least developed countries by developed nations, which is not a donation, but a cleaning fee. We must answer them by the urgent loosening of the debt that strangles climate change adaptation efforts in vulnerable regions like SADC, Southern Africa Development Community. We must answer them by establishing timelines for replacing all toxic technologies with clean ones. We must answer them through bilateral and multilateral relations that build green economies. And as you consider your answer, know that neither Africa in general nor Malawi in particular will take no for an answer. Not anymore. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Uhuru Suuna, President of Mongolia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to convey my heartfelt congratulations to the Government of the United Kingdom for hosting the 26th session of the Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and wish every success to the work of the session. It is universally acknowledged that in order to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement by 2050, every country needs to reconsider its efforts and strive together through a bold and comprehensive policy. This challenging time, when humanity is facing the scourge of COVID-19, the pandemic, reminds us that we need to change our attitude towards nature and take bold and decisive measures to accelerate green growth. Mr. President, Mongolia, as one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change, fully supports the efforts of the international community to reach net zero emissions and reaffirms its commitments to the Paris Agreement and to mobilizing every possible resource to fulfill them. Mongolia raised its target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, a main cause of climate change, to 22.7% by 2030 through updating its nationally determined contributions. I am pleased to announce from this podium that there is an opportunity to increase our commitment to 27.2% through the introduction of advanced technology and innovation and to the increase of necessary funding. Mr. President, it is crucial to develop a cross-border energy network in the Northeast Asian region in order to meet its growing energy consumption and enhance production of renewable energy. Mongolia supports the Asian Supergrid Initiative for increasing renewable energy sources and improving energy supply in Northeast Asia. Within this framework, we are actively collaborating with the countries in the region to build a large energy complex based on the vast solar and wind resources of the Gobi region. Taking this opportunity, I would like to underscore that Mongolia has successfully organized an international dialogue on Mongolia green development 2 weeks ago in Ulaanbaatar ahead of the COP26 summit. As a national contribution to combating climate change, Mongolia has launched a national campaign to plant billions of trees by 2030 in order to reach net zero emission targets, reduce poverty, and combat desertification through economic means, protect the health of children and women who are the most vulnerable to climate change, and improve overall quality of life. Thus, Mongolia has decided to spend at least 1% of its GDP annually to mitigate the adverse effects of climate change and desertification. Mongolians say The source of life is water, and the source of water is the tree. We believe that the implementation of Planting Billions of Trees initiative, which is the manifestation of our traditional culture to care for nature, will make a significant contribution to reducing dust storms that affect the ecology, health, and economy of not only Asia, but also the Americas. Mr. President, last but not least, I would like to emphasize the important role of a close regional and international cooperation in increasing capital flows for low and middle-income countries to combat climate change. Only our common understanding, collaboration, resolve, and perseverance are utmost important to achieving our mission to combating climate change, the world's greatest challenge of all time, and to have a responsible approach to nature and leave a greener world for our descendants. It is time for the nations of the world to combine their efforts for this deed. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Ibrahim Solih, President of Maldives. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Madam President, His Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. As a leader of a small island state, I have stepped up to many fora to say the exact same things I'm about to say now. But because of the gravity of the situation, because our existence is at stake, I have no choice but to keep on repeating it. What will it take for you to listen to us? The Maldives is often cited as one of those low-lying countries that could disappear off the map because of the climate crisis. I am here to tell you that my people are already living the steady onset of this reality. Just this past month, I was traveling within the Maldives. On the 6 islands I visited, all of them were experiencing severe erosion. This is just one example of how our people are having to live with the harsh realities of climate change. Our islands are slowly being inundated by the sea one by one. If we do not reverse this trend, the Maldives will cease to exist by the end of this century. The science tells us many things. It tells us we are facing a code red scenario where global mean temperature is presently at 1.1 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels and is rising at frightening pace towards the 1.5 degree ceiling. Wildfires, harsher droughts, and storm surges ravage communities around the world with greater intensity and frequency because of climate change. Based on the science, we know that our capacity to protect the health, well-being, and safety of our people and our planet is being driven to the brink. Ladies and gentlemen, as I have said before, if the rise in temperature remains unchecked at 1.5 and jumps to 2 degrees, that is the death sentence to the Maldives. In a world where we cease to exist, our fate would remain a dark omen of the grim future that awaits the rest of the world. My people are determined not to let this transpire. We are determined to be part of the global solution to reverse these trends, to change the status quo. We are determined to lead by example by taking the most ambitious climate actions and committing to achieve a low-emission development and a climate-resilient future. The climate emergency cannot be solved by the actions of individual nations alone. Major emitters must step up their nationally determined contributions and make even more ambitious commitments to achieving net zero. Countries must band together and assist the most climate vulnerable states to adapt to climate change. Commitments alone are not enough. At Paris, this assembly reaffirmed its previous pledge to provide $100 billion annually to developing vulnerable states. I am disappointed that we are nowhere near to realizing this. Even when a project gets green light for financing under these commitments, we are mired in red tape and a myriad of reports, studies, and other assorted paperwork that render ineffective these projects mean to address the urgency imparted on our communities by climate change. We need to agree on stringent accountability measures to ensure that all commitments on climate finance are met if vulnerable states are to stand a chance. We have all decided to come to Glasgow, despite the pandemic, with common purpose. We all know that this might, in fact, be the last chance we have to get ahead of climate change. Please do not let this opportunity go to waste. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Laurentino Cortizo, President of Panama. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Sus Excelencias.
Excellencies, of the 193 countries who are members of the United Nations, only 3 have presented their inventories of emissions and have been declared carbon negative. Once again, of the 193 UN member states, only 3 countries have been declared carbon negative. And Panama is one of those 3 countries. Many of the world leaders in this summit have shared their country plans, what they aim to do to become carbon neutral by 2030. Some have shared what they intend to do to become carbon neutral by 2050. We in Panama are already carbon negative. In other words, the forests of Panama absorb more carbon than we emit as a country. How did we do it? We, the Panamanians, understood that what is good for Panama is also good for the planet. We began by respecting our original peoples and our forests. We, in fact, protect 33% of the surface area of our country. Panama is straddled by 2 seas, and Panama also takes care of its oceans. We've been able to protect 30% of our marine areas. Once again, we have met our overall targets 9 years early, which means that we are the global blue leader. Our contribution to the planet is especially important in the light of the fact that Panama is the country in Latin America and the Caribbean which has the best connectivity for maritime and air transport. Our Panama Canal, one of the main trade routes of the world, connects 170 countries together and 1,920 ports together. Ladies and gentlemen, Panama has been successful in its endeavor to become carbon negative, and this through concrete actions. And this is what Mother Earth needs the developed countries to do, to take concrete action. It is ironic, is it not, that of the $100 billion pledged in the Paris Agreement to provide green support to emerging countries, of those $100 billion, Panama has received nothing. We are here today, once more, speaking once again about funds which are supposed to be set aside to provide an incentive to those countries who are doing well, who do it well. My question is, what concrete answer is this summit going to give to countries such as mine, who do more than talk and move on to concrete actions? From this summit, we must exit with a short-term roadmap to provide resources to countries such as mine for the sustainability of our contribution to the planet. Either we act now, or we are heading towards new disasters. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Mohamed Bazoum, President of Niger. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President. President, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government. Here we are in Glasgow following other similar conferences, also tasked and replete with a great deal of hope. And yet the latest report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change notes that climate change, as it is observed today, and despite the commitments made in Paris, is of unprecedented scale. The worsening of this climate change is particularly worrying for a country such as my own, Niger, at the heart of the Sahara, at the heart of the Sahel, and jeopardized by ceaseless desertification, which is continuing to bury agricultural and pastoral lands under the sand. Populations engaged in animal husbandry are thus forced to move ever further south and to dispute with agricultural communities for natural resources, which also for a great time now have also been subject to an inexorable depletion as a result of climate change. Climate change in the form of repeated droughts and, paradoxically in recent years, also by equally destructive flooding. Ladies and gentlemen, the phenomenon of terrorism currently visible in the Sahel, far from generating out of spontaneity or by accident, is linked in large part to climate change, which, by impoverishing biodiversity, has jeopardized the way of life of herders. I would thus like to make a solemn appeal for the international community to mobilize in the form of a special fund alongside the countries of the Sahel that are jeopardized by the advance of the sands, just as they have mobilized alongside the small island nations that are being invaded by the ocean waters. This fund should serve projects of reforestation to reforest areas that have been invaded by the desert. Poor countries such as ours, which have no responsibility for climate change, are today those that pay the highest price for the consumerism that was promoted by a development model which took very little notice of peoples and future generations. Ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, I would like to reiterate our support for the common African position on climate change and make an appeal to emitting countries to keep to their commitments to developing countries by clearly defining mechanisms for the implementation of the Paris Agreement, which is still awaiting implementation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Before we proceed, I would ask Excellencies to speed up their speeches since the transportation is set and it's ready for pick you up outside. Thank you. Now it is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Hakainde Hichilema, President of Zambia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency Boris Johnson, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and Chairperson of the Summit. Your Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, Your Excellency MS Patricia Espinosa, Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I wish to begin by thanking you and congratulating Your Excellency Prime Minister Boris Johnson for convening this important summit at the commencement of the 26th session of the Conference of Parties, COP26, to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. I am confident that together with the global community of nations, we will deliver the outcome that the world urgently needs for averting a climate crisis. Chairperson, science is clear that we only have a small window of opportunity to ensure that we collectively take decisive action and prevent the negative impact of climate change. For developing and vulnerable countries like Zambia, which is among the least developed countries with multiple challenges, climate change brings an additional layer of challenges, an additional burden, and aggravates existing ones. Very important. Climate change makes it difficult for us to effectively address a number of social economic challenges in order to lift our people from high poverty levels so as to improve their livelihoods. Chairperson, for the sake of humanity, a positive outcome from this conference is not an option, but an absolute necessity. We are confident that the global community will share our sense of urgency in this matter. If there is any lesson, like has been indicated by other speakers before me, we should learn from the COVID-19 pandemic, it is a need for our collaboration on this shared planet in order to secure our mutual safety and success. We are hopeful and confident that if the desired outcome from this summit, and indeed COP26 is achieved, we should move to agree the following. Number one, clear, deep, and real cuts in greenhouse gas emissions to be addressed by all countries, with the developed countries taking the lead. Number two, adequate, predictable financing to enable the developing countries to make impactful contributions to address this critical global challenge. Number three, support with technologies and the capacities that the world needs to shift from carbon-intensive development paths to low-carbon green economies. Absolutely essential. Number four, placing a premium on adaptation measures and the support required to ensure that we safeguard the lives and livelihoods of the most vulnerable people on the planet and to protect natural ecosystems. Number five, resolving the remaining technical bottlenecks that are delaying us from unleashing the full potential of the Paris Agreement. Chairperson, Zambia is willing and ready to support your leadership and will work closely with the global community in resolving this challenge. In this regard, I'm happy to report that prior to this summit in July 2021, Zambia submitted a revised and updated nationally determined contribution to the Paris Agreement, spelling out the following ambitious efforts. Number one, we have pledged to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by 25% based on the 2010 levels by 2030, using a combination of our own domestic resources and other support that we have traditionally received before. Number two, we are willing and ready to go further to reduce our emissions by 47% if we are adequately supported by you, our global partners. Number three, we have increased the sectors under mitigation from the initial 3 to 6 in the revised NDC as we steadily move towards the economy-wide mitigation approach. Number four, given that adaptation is a critical component of our NDC, we have also developed indicators to enable us to track progress on how we are building resilience in the natural and human systems. Number five, we will expedite the implementation of activities through our development of bankable project proposals to enable us to access the necessary financing. And of course, number six, last but not the least, in just 2 months of our being elected in office by the Zambian people, we have created a ministry, a dedicated ministry of green economy and environment, which will spearhead the work of addressing climate change and other related challenges in a robust manner. Chairperson, as I conclude, I wish to emphasize the need for us all to foster a sense of urgency as we work to give our political momentum to our negotiators and encourage them to make good use of the next 2 weeks to give the world an outcome it needs from this conference. We have an obligation and noble task to deliver for our citizens the much needed and desired changes to preserve this planet and safeguard our environment for future generations. Chairperson, this is our duty. This is our individual, collective, and indeed inescapable responsibility to our world, to our planet. I thank you all for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure.
أشكرك صاحب السعادة ويسعدني أن أرحب بصاحب السعادة السيد جورج ويا رئيس ليبيريا. صاحب السعادة الكلمة لكم.
Excellency, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this year COP26 is taking place at a time when the world is having to learn to live with the devastating and disruptive consequences of the deadly coronavirus pandemic. Climate change, like COVID-19, present an even bigger threat to the world and to our common humanity. We have therefore gathered here at this 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference to seek common action to save our planet and bring equity and fairness to how we achieve this objective honor the Paris Accord on climate change. We are all aware that there is an inherent imbalance in the current architecture of climate financing. Countries like Liberia, who maintain and protect the largest remaining tracts of forest reserves, receive the lowest benefit for these ecosystem services. We who are the richest in terms of forest resources and biodiversity are the poorest in terms of socio-economic development. Although we bear the brunt of the impact of climate change, we benefit the least from the existing solutions and financial arrangements currently in place for tackling climate change. In order to address this imbalance, there needs to be a fundamental shift in the way we tackle this mismatch in climate investment today. I believe that one of the ways that this can be done is to establish an African carbon credit trading mechanism. With your support, Liberia will be willing to host a conference in the near future to explore the details and structure of such an entity. We will work with Pan-Africans and other global financial institutes to develop a long-term regulated market for the African carbon credit. I am convinced that this initiative will increase the chances of all African countries that depend on their forest reserve to attain sustainable economic growth and national development in line with the vision set out in the 2030 Agenda. Excellency, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, together we can make a difference as a shared community of global citizens with a common destiny. Together we can heal the world from the scourges of climate change. Together, we can save this earth from the deadly consequences of global warming. Together, we can bring humankind into harmony with nature. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, in 2018, the government of Liberia ratified the Paris Agreement, which is signed into law to save our planet and because we believe in the change for hope. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. János Áder, President of Hungary.
We are at a critical moment. The clock is ticking. We are in the 24th hour. We are at a crucial moment for humanity. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I am sure you have heard phrases like these and similar ones in recent days. The thing is that the very same phrases or phrases having the same dramatic tone have already been said in Durban, in Cancun, in Copenhagen. It is very difficult to make the electorate believe that we have continuously been in the 24th hour for 26 years. It is difficult to talk about a successful conference if the situation, in our case, the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, is constantly deteriorating. And the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has been rising for the last 25 years, and unfortunately, it has been on the rise since Paris as well. The achievements of science and the signals of nature are quite clear. We must act. Raising ambition. That is why we are gathered here in Glasgow. That is good. For me, Glasgow is not just about raising ambition. It is about regaining credibility, about taking action and seeing visible, tangible results as soon as possible. We need ambition, so says everyone today and said up till now. That is good, but what does that mean? What should it entail? First of all, it should entail an honest introspection by each country on what they have achieved so far. Action instead of PR stunts. Number two, the earliest possible agreement on the pace of reductions by the major emitters who are responsible for 80% of global emissions. Today, many mention has been made of the G20 meeting in Rome. Just 3 words by way of comment. There was no ban introduced on building new coal-fired power plants. There is no date set for the end of subsidies on fossil fuels. No agreement between the parties. And what I've been seeing is that this insistence on the 1.5 degrees, the further we get away from it, the more it is mentioned and cited in international documents. Getting back to the original issue, what should the ambition raise entail? Number 3, countries with per capita emissions significantly above the international average should take on a greater role in financing the ambition increase. Number 4, besides reducing emissions, we should also pay at least as much attention to adaptation. Hungary, the country which is responsible for 0.13% of the world's emissions, Hungary is committed to the following. We will be climate neutral by 2050. The Hungarian National Assembly has adopted a law on this. The implementation has begun. We will certainly phase out coal-based electricity generation by 2030, but we hope to do so perhaps as early as 2026. Number 3, we will increase solar capacities from 3,000 megawatts by the end of this year to 6,500 megawatts by 2030. Number 4, from 2030 onwards, we will only use electric buses in our urban public transport. Until then, the fleet will be continuously replaced. Number 5, we will be implementing a major afforestation program. And finally, a month from now, we will be organizing a Sustainability Expo and World Summit in Budapest to not only talk about the importance of raising ambition, but also to showcase the solutions, innovation, and technologies needed to achieve our common goal. We look forward to seeing you all in Budapest. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Distinguished heads of state and government, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, this brings us to the end of our national statements in this plenary for today. We will continue with this delivery of national statements tomorrow at 10 in plenary Chern-Gorm. With this, I declare this joint meeting of the COP, CMP and the CMA adjourned. Secretariat will advise if this should be said, depending on which plenary finishes last. Now that we have finished the high-level segment for today, we will have a short interval with leading non-state actor voices on stage. I would now like to welcome Dr. Salim Hugh, Director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development, Kristalina Georgieva, Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, and David Malpass, President of the World Bank, to the stage on the theme of finance and resilience.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to join you today on behalf of the Race to Resilience campaign and communities around the world, including my own in Bangladesh, who are already living with the impacts of a changed climate. We know the scale of the challenge we are facing. It doesn't matter where you live or where you govern. Floods are devastating in Germany and Bangladesh, and indeed in Scotland in the last few days, as we saw here. Droughts ruin livelihoods in California and the Sahel. Extreme heat is already a reality for most people and is proliferating. That is my first message. Adapting to climate change and building resilience is a call for everyone, all countries, rich and poor. It is also why it is so important we place adaptation and resilience on par with mitigation in terms of actions and investments. It is adapt or die unless we take action now. My second message is about the frontline communities who are the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. We do not have the luxury of waiting, and we are already leading. Let me give you an example from my country, Bangladesh, which is one of the most vulnerable countries to the impacts of climate change, with a very low-lying coastal population already feeling the impacts of salinity from sea level rise. But they are not sitting idle. They are taking actions. Farmers are growing salt-tolerant varieties of rice. We have one of the best cyclone warning and evacuation systems in the world, and people are taking actions themselves. We need to build on these stories, and there are many, many more in other vulnerable developing countries where we can share knowledge and support locally led adaptation to climate change. The good news is that this is happening. To support the efforts already underway by non-state actors, the COP26 president helped launch the Race to Resilience. This has mobilized a global coalition of partners who are taking action to build the resilience of urban, rural, and coastal communities in over 100 countries. Their actions will reach over 2 billion people who are exposed to climate hazards and help regenerate systems of nature which are vital to both mitigation and resilience. But underneath the big numbers, though, there are many stories like the one I just spoke of in my country, Bangladesh. So my second message is that we all need to support these efforts of the bottom-up, local-level actors and adapters, to finance them, to give them the necessary skills and support to reach them so that they can be the agents of change themselves and not just depend on charity from others. We now have the chance to learn lessons from the past 2 years, particularly the COVID-19 pandemic, and to build resilience that is interconnected, both on the public health side as well as on the climate change side, to make sure that we are adapted to and resilient to climate shocks. This is not only the morally right thing to do, but also the economically smart thing to do. So, delegates, I'd like to leave you with one closing message, a last word. I was asked to think of what my last word would be, and my last word is the word gobeshona. It is a Bangla word in my language. It means research, but it also is the name of an alliance of local-level adapters, not just in Bangladesh, but in many other developing countries, and indeed in developed countries which are also suffering the impacts of climate change. It's an alliance, it's a network, and I would invite you to learn the word and to get to know more about it. Before I end, it's my great pleasure, and I'm greatly delighted to introduce the next speaker, who is Kristalina Georgieva, the Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, and more importantly than that, as far as I'm concerned, an old friend, and also the former co-chair of the Global Commission on Adaptation and a great champion of adaptation in developing countries. I'd like to yield the floor to Kristalina Georgieva. Thank you. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Salim. Because we failed to cut emissions on time and scale necessary to protect our beautiful planet, adaptation needs are going up and up and up. For developing countries alone, in this decade, they are to spend somewhere between $140 and $300 billion. And if we continue to drag our feet, that is going to double. So communities are acting, as we heard from Salim. Policymakers also have a responsibility to act. First, they need to understand the vulnerabilities of their countries. In other words,